Meeting's open. We have yes. I've moved and last my second. Confirmation of agenda. You happy with the agenda? You don't want to add anything or delete anything in case we don't want to receive it. And the part moves on.
I'd like to move the law enforcement thing.
I'll withdraw. Hearing problems today. Nobody's got a disclosure open, so we go to confirmation of I have to remember what everything else about. Somebody that can remember those minutes. Around moves. Maybe it's a record and for 4 seconds. Group work payment, page 15. Julian, you talk this.
I think I am, sir. There's quite a few people learning not very well, or we've got the lurgy, so I'll do some talking. They might be able to help me out. So, in relation to the work plan, this is the usual standing item for members to provide you with an update on priority actions that are being undertaken across the group-wide area out of the group work plan. You'll see that we don't refer to the impacts of COVID anymore, but we certainly the seasonal illnesses and some ongoing vacancies do have an impact on the work plan. But overall, we are going in the right direction. I think at the last time of reporting, there were some areas of red in terms of traffic light setting, which is off track, not meeting plan dates, and help was needed. That was specifically around the iwi engagement, inclusion of iwi Māori in the governance and planning aspects of CDEM. I'm pleased to say that that's gone to orange now that we have a plan in place and it's back on track. We've engaged a contractor to assist us in doing that work. The contractor that we've engaged is the same contractor who provided the if you want the pathway or the report to joint committee on how to approach the engagement with iwi. So they became available, which is a bonus, so there's some continuity. That's one of the main things to report on there, sir. And in terms of another area that I would highlight, which is on the bottom of page 17, and it is item goal 5.1.1. There's another item in the report that talks about the exercises that have been undertaken and how that addresses the capability development is people are available to support a response, and we've done some exercising across the region that goes some significant way to delivering on that action. The final part I would highlight is the bottom of page 18, which is in relation to recovery. And we are undertaking at the moment, as we speak, there's an assessment underway of all local authorities' capacity to deliver local recovery. And that includes interviews with recovery managers and looking at systems and processes. And by the next meeting, we will have an interim report of what recovery looks like, with a very good, hopefully, action plan coming out of that, about how we improve our capacity in that space. And I think for anybody watching contemporary CDEM at the moment and having a look at what's going on down in Nelson, Tasman, I think it's fair to say it brings it home that the work probably starts in recovery. Recovery is always, not always, but recovery's not really been seen as the favourite child of CDEM. It's always probably been the unseen child. I think the experiences of Nelson, Tasman at this moment in time are really shining a light on the hard work is about to start there and the importance of recovery, making sure we've got the right people, structures and processes. So that's the report from the work plan, the work plan, sir.
So can you just confirm or deny that the contractor advised to assist with iwi assimilation to this group is not related to Muslim.
Confirm that's, well, not that I'm aware of it.
It just brings, yeah, it's really interesting with this now sort of Tasman situation, and that perhaps there needs to be a fifth R, and I've always talked about this being regeneration. So you can recover from something, but then to regenerate.
Any other questions? All happy with the group plan? We shall receive it. Noel Smith moves, and it will have seconds. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Government reforms, what's happening? What the government doing?
So I may have to draw on Vicky online for some parts of this if you've got any questions, but I'll start it off. So this is to provide you an update on where we are at in relation to the Becker report that was provided at the last joint committee meeting. So at the last joint committee meeting and the CEG meeting, Becker provided a matrix outlining which reforms we should prioritise given the scale of the government reform at the moment, because they were, if you want, the most effective or impactful on emergency management. It was quite a high-level document, a high-level matrix, and they gave us some pointers around how we might want to engage with those priority work programs. But they didn't get down to the level of specifically this is how you're going to do it. They gave us some pointers, and we came up with we've come up with now an action plan of how we're going to engage, when we're going to engage, using existing work groups, using existing sector entity groups, and we prioritize those that Becker told us to prioritize, in essence. So one of the things that was brought up when we at CEG, when we looked at this, was the engagement timeframes, which would be for local government September, the end of September, right through the emergency management reforms, probably later on in the year, you're talking November, December, and into January, February, March. And then for the Resource Management Act, which includes the Natural and Built Environment and the Strategic Planning Act, again, the same time periods. It's been identified that the joint committee, this joint committee will no longer be in place. And you've currently got a process where councillors Christie, Park and yourself, Mr. Chair, are on a submissions work on behalf, not with any delegations from the joint committee, but to work on behalf of the joint committee. Now, of course, with the two of the three of you not standing this year, the recommendation is that we look at creating a structure, not identifying individuals, because we don't know what the elections are going to look like, but identifying a structure in advance that will allow us to quickly get into the submissions process, very similar to what you've undertaken today, but looking at members that is either the chair or deputy chair, one or the other, then looking at members from a coastal environment, council, a large urban population, and also a large rural environment. And if you could agree to a structure similar to that, it would assist the next joint committee in appointing people to the submission role, so we could submit against the priority government reforms. So that's the recommendation that would come up for you to consider.
What do you think that this is likely to be required?
Well, the earliest one would be the end of September. We're looking at public consultation currently. This is due to open at the end of September.
It's going to be a long period of time to respond to. It's not a month, I believe. It's quite a long time. I feel it's until the following. I could be wrong. That's longer than the usual 6 weeks or so. Yes.
So the report's been released now, 28th of October. So it will be there. Yes. Yeah, the list is pushed today.
So can I just ask you If you finish. Can I ask a question? So I'm supporting to what is generally here, but there's normally I think of a word, a convention that a present council can't dictate to a future council. This is the same principle to a future group, what its processes will be, but we could try. So I don't have a problem. Secondly, just a point of clear question on a slightly related subject. This committee doesn't go out of existence until our replacements are actually sworn in. Is that not correct? So we go beyond the 7th, 8th of October, I believe. The joint committees continue until such time as their replacements have been installed. So if there was an emergency management issue, this group would continue until our replacements are sworn in.
Yes, Chair, I'm pretty sure that we've got a confirmed meeting policy. So we can't, for example, this committee can't declare, Chair can't declare an emergency post. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think the joint committee, as long as its formation will be resolved, and carries on. The chair.
Yeah,
Members of this committee are the mayors,
yeah, well, the delegates.
and they can delegate if they want to. The moment that the mayor is sworn in, they are members.
And that's my point. I'm not worried about once you're sworn in, they're sworn in, we're out of here. That could be like you've just been told that Madam Alapiaka might not be a month because of an internal issue there. And so I don't want this to get in the way of what we're trying to do here, but just I would like that clarified if we can before the end of the meeting.
I think what you can do is use the, say that the committee we support to look at any resolutions will be from these areas. So therefore the mayors coming in from those areas, because you don't have a chair.
No, yeah, that's right. Yes.
So that's the only way to do it. To say one metropolitan, one vertical, one whatever.
So yeah, I'm happy to support the recommendation.
Let's just talk. So what you just described is, as we've understood previously, is the as historically we've talked about the joint committee doesn't dissolve until such time as. However, what we've had a new point, what we've had this year is a very clear piece of legal advice from NEMA that says categorically, absolutely not. Are there any powers until the new mayors are sworn in for members of our declaration? That's where they've been very specific. And I think we gave the advice at the last meeting in one of the reports that says in the event that once the joint committee, basically we're into election period, until the mayors are literally sworn in, any declaration transition notice that ordinarily sits with the mayor has to go. And I know they're looking at that as an issue and are trying to address that through the new CDEM bill. That's one of the issues they're trying to look at.
And that's what when you were explaining it, River was talking, was if you don't have a mayor, you don't have a regional group chairperson, then the minister's got to declare a local emergency, which is
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in Haraki's case, where there's only one candidate for mayor, does that mayor continue his powers through that period?
Yes.
It's got to be
So he's
You got to be sworn in because between now and swearing in.
he's still the mayor though.
Yeah. Yeah. As you are a councillor. So that's
So Julian, are you asking for a resolution that this committee supports a subcommittee to look at any urgent submissions to be made up of one metropolitan, one coastal, one? Do you want that tonight?
That was what we were looking for, but I obviously take the advice of Councillor Smith in terms of can't tell one council to tell a new council what to do, and that convention is I'll take the advice accordingly on that. What we're looking for is to help the next committee out, in essence, by saying this is a good idea and this would provide good representation. It wouldn't be a subcommittee, it'd be a working group. That's how we've done it previously, is that it would be a working group who came together on behalf of everyone without delegation and sent a message out. But those, to get a broad view of the submissions, we'd be looking from an urban, a coastal and a
I need to recommend that the next council take that up. The reality is it's not as urgent with the extended out date to 28 October and then November, December. So staff could work on a recommendation to go to the first committee meeting.
Your recommendation today, that the working party be established and that this working party be ratified at the first formal meeting of the regional committee.
Which to that effect, I'm happy with everyone else.
Happy with that?
Just through the chair,
covers that.
just through the chair, can we just add the word provincial and rural? So it doesn't exclude the outlying capital.
Rural provincial.
Yes.
For them.
Yep, I'll make a note of it.
The moon is taking.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're saying against. So you happy with that? My apologies. We have sitting behind me the chair of the regional council. It's not often that we get the chair of the regional council that even know we exist, but I don't have an interest in what they're doing. Can I therefore, because I have people sitting behind me, invite the chair to please join us at table. Thank you.
Yes, there's any ex officio committees.
No ex officios on this because the regional council is but one of the members. So it is the mayor or the appointee, those are the areas. That is fine.
May through the chair just add the comment that in respect of civil defence or any other matters, there's a transitional period which the CEO has powers which are normally accorded to the chair or the CEOs. So if there's any delay, then the CEOs have a significant role to play in terms of ensuring anything might occur in that interim period.
CEOs have the most to say anyhow.
It's
Why could it change?
I'm reaffirming.
So you have to go with that as a recommendation. If you want to read that to them, yes.
I'm going to do that. It's in the opposition today. Okay, so the recommendation is that we receive the report and that the Waikato Civil Defence Emergency Management Group Joint Committee approve the recommended submission subgroup member structure and be ratified at the first meeting of the new joint committee. So obviously, as Councillor Smith said, that new committee can decide to change it as they feel would be inclined at that point.
That's pretty close to what we were thinking, isn't it? I think so. All in favour, please say aye. Thank you, Mike. Harry. To page 21, the national plan. William.
Yes, sir. So this is one of those areas that, of course, we don't ask, there's no provision to ask for feedback because it's either for decision or information at council's or joint committee level. So it's for information, but I'd be happy to hear anything you've got to say on the matter. So this report is to provide you with an update on where the national plan and plan reviews are. And you can't look at one without looking at the other. So the new national CDEM bill will now be introduced to Parliament late in 2022. That's the current thinking. And the national CDEM, new national CDEM plan falls out of that, is likely to be introduced later 2023 around May. These dates are later than previously reported to the Joint Committee. So NEMA previously provided you updates that the bill would have already been into the House for consideration, and we would probably be working on the plan about now. So about, I would say, close to 12 months beyond what we thought would be national. So the current CDEM Act states that we must begin a review of our own group plan where it has been operative for 5 years or more. Now, for us, that means our group plan will be 5 years old in May 2023. So it's reasonably foreseeable that before the new national plan is known, our national plan will hit its 5th anniversary. However, we have commenced a review of our group plan, which forms the basis, which is under the hazards and risks, which is in line with the director's guidance and in line with the approach that you resolved in August 21, which was to commence the review and place all other aspects of the review on hold until we got further direction nationally. So the report is for you to receive, but I just ask you to note that the completion of the review will be later. The group plan review will now be later than envisaged when you made your resolution in August 2021 due to the extended time frames of the new national plan CDEM bill. But we are legally compliant. We are meeting by reviewing the first part of any plan, which is the risk and hazard scape, because everything falls from that. And we've published it in the newspaper for the region, which is effective in. We are meeting our legal and director's guidance obligations.
So the legislation says you have to commence the review, which we have done. So we've got a tick on there. Does the legislation make any reference to how long you can have before you finalise? It would be 5 years.
It doesn't say any of that, but what I would, in terms of like the word convention, so I'll build on that one today, is if you have a look at the convention would be held to account by NEMA, would be the organisation that holds us to account for a late national, for a late group plan or anything along those lines. NEMA's national plan was done in 2015 and it's still active 7 years later. Yes. So
I ain't going to tell us off.
no, I don't think that. But there's nothing to tell us. In fairness, there's nothing to tell us off for.
Yeah,
Because we are compliant with directors' guidelines and compliant with legislation.
so you're all happy with that? Go on hold. Move Thomas, second to Philip. The information is received on favor say aye. Aye. Move on to the response.
So this is to provide you with some information on national policy developments related to NZRTs or New Zealand response teams and how they are developed to the CDEM group. There's only one response team in the Waikato area, that is New Zealand response team number 6, and they are Taupo District Council. They are the parent organisation. Taupo District Council creates their priorities and sets the budgets for their resources and provides all the health and safety, PCBU and other aspects you would expect of a parent organisation. That team's been in place probably since the early 2000s. I don't know a specific date, it's been around some time. And historically, as a CDEM group, we've really not been involved, or not historically, certainly in recent years, we've not been involved in the NZRTs. As in, it's been the purview of Taupo District Council. They've set priorities, they've set training, they've looked after the group. We benefited from them, certainly for the Thames Coromandel, but it's not something that's come under our day-to-day overview. In 2018, in the TAG report, the government spends and NEMA to work with KEG chairs on how the teams could be recognised as being trained for the responsibilities they had. That was as a result of various NZRTs across the country having different levels of training and experience and a lack of consistency. So the driving force behind that was how can we assure primary responding agencies such as FENS and police, that people were turning up to support the response and development of applications. So as a consequence of that, tasking or output from the TAG review, a draft operating guideline has been created. And in that draft operating guideline, it's proposed that NZRT capability is now coordinated through the local CDEM group. So CDEM gets more engagement in that space and involvement with oversight from NEMA. It is proposed that there are a consistent and established set of skills and functions to be undertaken by NZRT. So it's very defined what they can and can't do. There is an opportunity, if local needs require, that there are additional, if you want, functions that they can apply to undertake. But there is a core set that everyone must undertake, which is different to where we currently are, which local district council sets the priorities based on their local. So where there are any specialist functions being provided or proposed through an NZRT that may be duplicated by other agencies, and I use urban search and rescue and light and water rescue as examples, then CEG now has to, well, not just for those specialist functions, but for the registration of these groups, CEG now has to sign off and say there's a justification for these groups in our region. So again, is an executive leadership role of CEG being brought in that hasn't been there in recent times. So what CEG have done is CEG have tasked the Emergency Services Coordinating Committee and our local controllers and defence controllers to come together and identify, in the first instance, if there is a gap and a justification to maintain the NZRT in total. And we're not duplicating effort, create confusion, command and control confusion in an event, but also to look at, is there a benefit or a need for a wider increased level of NZRT across our region, when we know, for example, the pro rata Waikato CDEM has probably some of the lowest coverage of NZRT in the country. So the new draft operating guidelines don't provide any guidance around funding. For example, at the moment, all the funding comes out of total district councils, they're the parent organisation, that's CapEx and OpEx. But depending on what the Emergency Services Coordinating Committee come back with, and what the recommendations are, we could end up having a conversation around. There's a greater oversight and involvement by the group. Does that say this is a group cost? But I'm jumping the gun a bit there. So, from my own point of view, I do note in the report that despite these core functions that everyone's going to have to do, and the opportunity to add modules of experts in finite skills, if you want. Biggest value I've seen in these groups is the manual labour that they bring. And when we brought them up from Waikato and from Taupo to work in Thames and in Hauraki, it was the physical labour of emptying infirm people's houses of unsanitary carpets and furniture, putting it outside and helping clear a driveway, and reaching out and doing needs assessment. All that legwork and physical labour was of huge value to allow people to remain in place and not have to leave their homes because they were yellow sticked and unsanitary issues. So that's where the value lies. The biggest value for me, but of course we'll have to wait for the feedback from the Emergency Services Coordinating Committee and controllers as to whether or not there is a gap in that higher skilled space of to rescue new staff,
Taupo have been an asset for us. They've often reviewed kit, they've got trained people and they can. So they have been an asset. What do you see, Taupo, moving up to the next stage?
Through this chair, we have to have a local conversation about it, and If, one thing that was pointed out at our last emergency management committee meeting in total was that there probably needs to be a refresh and look at getting Landstar, Coast Guard and all the parties in the room to talk about who does what and where and have a refresh of that. I can't myself say what the future of it will be. That needs to be discussed and decided upon by more than just myself, but it has been a great experience.
Chair, I mean, you haven't seen, I think, the terms of reference, but they are a real step up from what we currently have. And the Silicon says that what they're saying they're getting rid of the groups we've got now. That's 300 hours minimum training a year. Had to have professional coordinating. It's actually quite a high bar for us to get one across the line, and you've got to meet all those costs. It's almost, to me, it's replicating. We're going to replicate our fire forces at a higher level to supplement defence. So it's personally, I think they've gone too far. So what we're looking at is, Julian's mentioned the Kaiawa. And we have an event like that. We need to put our building consent team. You don't want to put them out as they have to have a peer to go to a site from basic health and safety. You don't have two building inspectors going to the one house. So you will support them with the likes of the Taupo crew. So they've got the basic training but to take them to the level they're going, it's
So you don't put it in prison. Shit hits the fan. What are we going to do?
Well, fins are our core. I know I mentioned the CEG meeting. I attended a meeting in Wellington a number of years ago, and this was just after the change to go from fossils to fins.
Yes.
And the CE of fins was that they have, his comment was they have the capacity to provide us all the support we need during an event. Now, I think recent observations of what's happening at the moment is that fins don't have that capacity. Only was a mismatch between those on the ground and those. But that is where we thought they were going.
So, yeah, to me, the emergency response has got to be right the first time, because that's what the community expects of us. So if this is a way in which, through design or ignorance, that type of support is removed, readily removed, because obviously the training and the team set up to go when you're called upon, if that's removed, how will a region or an individual such as Taupo, if they're able to support a neighbouring TA, how will that happen in the future if this is not, and friends can't respond? Will we get the support that we need for our communities?
Yeah, before we take that step, so the first step is actually what do we need? As Julian has mentioned, we've asked the emergency services, but also with our controllers, because I know I have fins at the moment. Do you have capacity to provide these sort of tasks during the event? They'll say no. They're really under the pump, and there's a lot of industrial issues going on. So with the controllers there, with our emergency services, they're going to look at what is the capacity within the Waikato to stand up these type of services. And that'll identify whether we have a deficit or not. And we'll come back to this committee with some recommendations around how we might address those deficits, if there's a deficit. And one is if the deficit is we just need one or two teams, or as a group we may support an existing arrangement and bring them to the next level, such as Taupo and another council. But I think once we get that information, we'll be able in a position to make an informed decision about whether we need to look at standing up some of these groups or whether existing structures such as fins, etc. Yes.
Through the chair, I think that this is another sort of ripple effect of rural 5 being moved back into Ben's with no real thought as to that response mechanism that was held within TAs being sort of smoothed out or recalibrated or whatever. And because of the issues within Ben's, it's not the right time for all those decisions to be made until that work's done at the emergency.
So you're really looking for an awareness for us today, to go away and do some work with people, come back to the next meeting with some recommendations.
It's a matter of identifying the gaps that we've got. And then, again, from my time with the Waikato, we have somebody in the middle of a big storm get lost on Mount Tiara. Now, this is a police response. So if you were lucky, one policeman would turn up in his car and say, I'm not sure what the hell I can do. Then we have the volunteer fire brigade would turn up and go in the bush and look for it, be out at night. And then I suggested that, you know, it'd be nice to put on a bit of fish and chips or something for the night. When they came back, police said, you got a budget. Oh, I haven't got a budget. You're in charge. I've got a budget for us, mate. Volunteer fire brigade, have you got a budget? Yeah, we ain't got a budget. Or I'll have to pay for a little more. So it's identifying what should be more formalised so that they can respond. Taupo is one that existed for quite some time, and there is a localised, could it be really localised? Because that's the only I am aware of people going getting lost and taking on.
The level of intelligence is far and out honestly.
But I think through something's changed. I think the example you just used about Mount Tiara is very relevant to Togo, for example. My understanding is in Togo, a lot of the tasking has come out of police in relation to lost people or dementia patients, and can you go and help do this? Actually, I think I'm pretty sure that land SAR component doesn't reach USAR. So like urban search and rescue, where there's been some kind of issue, but open land searches for missing people, I'm pretty sure from memory, it's beyond the recommendation in the new guidelines. So, you know, there will be a gap, potentially a gap created where there's a local need for things like that, but the NZRTs are not necessarily or not allowed to enter into that space. Very strict criteria allowed to do trade.
300 hours training seems a bit of an overkill for some people. Maybe 300 hours. It's really overkill.
If you go back to my comment about where we get the highest value, but we've seen the highest value. We've seen the highest value in those areas that fall outside lanes and RT. Just might require, we'll wait for the price to come down, but it might just require a rethink about we have teams that are not NZRT. And they're not, you know, there's very limited, it's a more limited focus on what they can do, and it's that low skill but massive value in the community, physical labour, helping to plan.
Okay, so all we can do is receive the information and next things formal. Update me, Mr. Mr. Democracy Services Advisor on legal matters.
That's the boss. The joint committee continues undischarged across the Triennial, and that's set out in section 12 of the Civil Defence Act 2002. Hang on. So until new members are appointed, these new members are enduring.
I thought I was.
Right.
No,
You keep
yes.
keep my swan dry and make this count, why not?
Yep.
It's on the anomaly.
The New Zealand response team report we received all of that. So we move to page 24, which is the tsunami cases zone. System C. 3 zones. Julian?
It's online. So I'll provide this report in relation, okay, this is one of those, it's for information. Only can't ask feedback if there's no decision here. Just to provide you with an update on where the national tsunami hazards stabilisation work is at. So the background to this is local force tsunami is one of our greatest risks in the Waikato. We have many years going back to 2009, operated a singular evacuation zone for public awareness and education purposes. So whilst we do the modelling based on the standards set by NEMA, as was then looked at, which is it's a 3-zone approach. We use that for planning purposes internally, but public messaging is always combining those 3 zones into one single zone. So there's no confusion, it's for simplicity. This single zone approach to public awareness and education is inconsistent with the current standard set by the NEMA Director Guidelines, which recommends a 3-zone approach for both planning and for public education. We've been on our own for a number of years in this space, but it's we're now in a position that other CDEM groups are opting to go for a single zone approach. So we're not on our own anymore, but we're still in the minority. NEMA is reviewing the current standard for both planning purposes and for public education. The early draft that we've had exposure to gives an option for some of the smaller coastline communities to go to 2 zones rather than 3, but there is still no reference in there to allowing a single zone approach. So a full report was provided to CEG on the 12th of August, where it was agreed that we continue as a region with our single zone public facing tsunami evacuation and maps and signage until a final decision is made by NEMA around the new standard, which is due to come out late next year, mid to late next year. So once we've received that new standard, it's in draft early exposure at the moment, we will undertake a full impact assessment of the effects on the Waikato CDEM group. And I put down there that actually it's financial and social. The financial one's pretty easy to identify at the moment. The lack of social science would make it difficult to do a social impact, because and one of the things that we're advocating for strongly at a national level is to convince us to become consistent, show us the social science that the 3-zone or 2-zone approach is as effective as quickly passing that message as a single zone. There are some recent examples where on a national, where it's clear that those 3 and 2-zone approach is confusing. Even a senior member of NEMA was interviewed on Radio NZ as part of the launch of this Know Your Zone national tsunami campaign, and what they were asked, what the 3 zones meant, what the different 3 zones meant for individuals. And in the end, that senior member of NEMA had to respond, look, it doesn't matter what zone you're in, if you feel an earthquake, just go. So I think that says it. So we're just waiting for we are advocating and pushing very strongly as a group and also GMO for that social science. If they can prove that the 3-zone or 2-zone approach is as effective as the 1-zone approach, then of course we would want to be consistent. But we've got to put our people before both.
So we continue as we are, but
we do.
losses catch up.
We do, but of course politically, and hence why we bring it to you today. Politically, we're no longer in isolation. I think Wellington region and Bay of Plenty just started moving towards a single zone approach. Some would argue Wellington has been in a single zone approach for some time because they use the blue line, which is exactly what ours is. So there is kind of safety in numbers, but when, from a political point of view, when NEMA did the Know Your Zone campaign nationally, in one of the disclaimers, it was highlighted that there are inconsistencies across them. And that disclaimer still there are inconsistencies across the symptoms groups. And of course, that shines the spotlight on us because it's clear on the map we have a different approach to others. So it can always raise questions from media or others as to why we are not currently consistent with the current director's guideline. Hegg clearly said that we'll need to understand the impact, and if we need to be consistent, we need to be consistent. But until NEMA come up with the final new guidelines, at this point to make it that we are pushing new guidelines absent.
So rather than just receive the information, which is what you do already, don't even have to understand it, could we not add to that the joint committee endorses the continuation of the single zone at this point? Yeah. Round works. We have a second over there.
Maybe I'll second it. I just say what I'm saying is that we have two regions.
That's three.
It's three. You don't touch one. But actually, use actual areas would work better. I've seen more evacuations. So I'm just concerned about confusion to the public. You know, they go to look for a sign of mine, zone 1 or zone 2, and what does the message say? Could just get the hell out of here. One zone's good.
It's simple. But rather than just listen to it, we come out and say it's our preferred position at this stage. Legislation changes, we have to switch and say we're certain. So anybody opposed to that resolution? Nobody will vote this line. That's right. Yeah. Financials, we're 85% of our expenditure expense money over.
Just clarify that comment there. Because I'm not confused, but what you're talking about through you to follow is that 427 is COVID related costs. So if they're added, I gather that's the total expenditure under table 1, and we're 97% spent. Are we not looking to absorb those if I've got read the report correctly?
You read them.
Yeah, and so therefore include them and get them off the book. Is that really what we're doing? Or because I don't see this need to carry forward if we've got the budget, because if you recall, I wanted us to set up a reserve to ensure that we could pay costs, and rather than going cap in hand to somebody and then we pay off over time. So I'm just not quite sure where we're sitting, because it's a little bit brief for me, but I think you've nodded that I've got it right. So why are we not talking about table 1 rather than 2? I appreciate the clarity, but we are going to absorb all those costs in this year.
We have an overdraft that we can draw on the Waikato Regional Council, which is only, I think, per year. We can draw on if we need.
Yeah, absolutely. We've gone about setting up a reserve though.
Yeah, but that's to do that can allow that to happen. There is no money that is carried forward as far as we're concerned, because the targeted rate is per property, and the more properties that come in, the more income we get from the targeted rate.
Appreciate it. What's this actually saying to you? Is this saying that with including the 427, we're 97% spent, and that's paid off those costs?
Absolutely right. So there's no including the 427,000, we are at 97%. However, if you look at table, so there is a lot of work not done because as a result of that 427,000. So that 427,000, we wipe our face, we don't have to ask for any more money. It gets paid off within the budget that we've got.
Yeah.
But there was a $427,000 more worth of work not done in terms of what work program. So we got diverted instead. So there is So we do have a carryover, we're allowed to carry monies over in a reserve, not because we are overrating, but because it's actually a lot of work program activity that's now not been undertaken as a result of that.
So can I put it a different way through here, Mr. Chair, is that if we carried the 427, or put the 427 here and carried the money forward to do the works as programmed and pay some of it off over time from that, the incoming money. So it's just, it's smoke and mirrors really. You've got to pay for everything sometime. It's not a credit card, but so how do we plan to do it going forward? Is it carry the work program forward in the equivalent budget, which is table 2 to my, and then the 427 is paid off over time as we get more rates coming in. Is that what's planned?
Yes.
Okay. That's the explanation that I wasn't sure of. Okay, thank you.
Other question, do you want to talk about this? You're the author of this report, according to my piece of paper.
So we'll put it right. Okay, thank you.
The discussion with regional council was that if you have a blowout in costs for the likes of COVID or something like that, who pays for it? The answer is that it is a debt that is owed by the region, and the members of the region are members of the region committee. Are you going to send a pro rata invoice to everybody in the region, which is a backward step, or is the regional council going to stand behind it? And some on the regional council were nervous that they had an unlimited guarantee that we would just spend. I'm not going to say, oh, would you mind? We're just going to do this in the middle of an emergency. We'll just do it. At the end of the day, get the bills. That's the plan. Find money and pay for it. Which is why the formalisation of that came in with a guaranteed uncalled on overdraft of $20.
Yeah, and when I was promoting, and it went through this committee, that we raised the rate slightly to create a pool of funds that we could draw on. And once we got it to a certain limit, we would pull that back or whatever. So hold it there. So my vision is that we build this fund as we do in Waikato District, and sadly we get it's called on, so we never really get to the end of where we're trying to get to, but at least we've got money. So the idea was to get money here so we don't have to go to cap in hand to the region and then have to pay it off over time. We're building that fund up, and at the same time we've got that in place. And it's, at the end of the day, if there's an event, we have to do it, and we have to find the funds at some stage. So just a matter of having it available there and then.
Yeah, and it was felt that the better option was to have the overdraft available for us rather than for us to overrate and put it in account.
So we haven't got that right.
It's not discussion. I think you're absolutely right. That was the approach. When you think about civil defence, it can't have the limitations that some other budgets can have in terms of if there's an emergency. So the council is always prepared to revisit, because the $1 million might cut it in either 2 or 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we were pragmatic about a solution.
So it's a seed to start with.
Yeah, but always with you that we're open to, if there's an emergency and responding. So that was the approach.
When it gets used from that overdraft, it may well be written off by services from the regional council at the end of the year.
No, that's fine. Put the systems in place.
It's a good deal.
That system's in place. Happy with that. Thank you.
Definitely a good deal through the chair. That's one thing we might be losing is his ability to manipulate systems for those committees. No, I call them, but don't write that down. He's certainly very capable in that space. So, yeah.
The fact that it is a set targeted rate, not a set budget to be recovered from a targeted rate, also gives us extra income every single year.
So thank you to the chair.
Yeah, got that one through that they didn't realise what they were doing.
I did.
Yeah, I know.
Is that being strong?
Just record.
That's right.
So resolved. Okay, so all you want to do at this stage is to just note the figures that you've got in there and not anything else. Keep going, yeah. Move the report we received in the park moves and for that seconds. That's fine. Over the page, group member exercise outcomes. We're all here.
This is good news, sir.
Well, it's good news if you're going to publish and say who got what.
I need some.
I do as council that.
So the report is here to update the group members in regards to exercises that were conducted. So you will recall this time last year, or maybe a bit longer, but there was for the first time as a group of members, we agreed a long-term plan KPI measure of the evaluation of an annual exercise to measure the effectiveness of training delivery. So we all have the same KPI measure. So this year was the first time that the end of this year was the first time that we used that KPI. And as a result of that, 208 staff members across our group were trained, or sorry, exercised, I should say, in civil defence emergency management. That's the first time, certainly, I can remember I've had to be here for every council to undertake a tier 1 exercise of some kind. What we got out of those 11 different exercises were areas for improvement and corrective actions identified, but also areas of excellence identified to share across some councils are doing something quite specific and different and best practice. Now, whilst all councils have got the same LTP KPI, which is the evaluation of an exercise to undertake or assess the effectiveness of the training delivery, some local authorities have set stretch targets. So there is a minimum, which is to show a year-on-year increase up to the 24-25 financial year where we hit the advancing, with the target of advancing at the end of that. But some councils have taken a different approach and they've set themselves stretch targets from this year onwards. Some have taken the minimum. So there isn't a consistent approach to what the schools or the measures look like apart from the overall statement. So we've used a framework that was approved by CEG, the assessment framework for consistent marking. That's caused a bit of conversation. So, for example, if a council was to undertake a full exercise, a full SIMS exercise, activation with the controller and the 7 SIMS functions that go with that, so the 8 SIMS functions in total, then they would get scored against each of those components that they exercised. If a council decided that they were only going to exercise part of their SIM structure via a tabletop and not full activation, so they're only assessing controller, intelligence and welfare, for example, then they would get scored in those 3 areas, but they would score 0 for the other 5. They wouldn't get let down, they would actually get scored 0. So because there are different approaches for different councils, you're not actually comparing one council scoring really highly because they've done a full activation doesn't necessarily mean that the council that scored low in terms of percentages scored poorly. It just means that they didn't exercise all of their functions. So to create a list here wouldn't have been of any value because you were comparing not apples and oranges, you're comparing bananas and sprouts, right? So that's not the purpose of that wasn't the purpose of this report. I think the fact that all local authority members undertook an exercise in accordance with the assessment framework, they got their baseline score, It's the first time we've done it, like I said, in my time here. We've all started on this journey. The focus it has brought, because when you, and particularly when you started looking at some of people started reporting their scores back and realizing, well, I didn't do a full exercise. I wish I had now, because it looks like I've scored poorly. So no, you haven't. It's just a reflection that you've only exercised a small proportion of your trained staff. And it's really has put capability in the spotlight. That's a good thing. So some consistent areas of excellence that have been highlighted were in logistics, welfare and PIM, and also control and leadership. Areas for improvement that were consistent were around iwi Māori participation and intelligence planning, recovery and operations. And it's of note that those SIMS areas where we saw a consistent need for improvement, those areas are areas where there is no national curriculum for training in place. So the areas that we did well, such as logistics, PIM, and welfare, there are courses, and we train those courses. The ones where there are gaps, unsurprisingly, there is no national curriculum for us to deliver on, or it's very new. So this has brought the spotlight on. It's really good news that the staff in all the councils now are really kind of engaged and enthused and are already planning for the 2023 exercises. So it can only benefit. While it's there for, if you're assessing the efficacy of our training, the focus that it's bringing to that training, focus that it's bringing on the exercising, will only benefit the capability. So that's why, Mr. Chair, that there is no score tables there, because it would have been. And each council will, they've set their own, some of them set their own stretch targets, so they'll be reporting them individually in their own, and that's where it should be reported in their own.
So what happens like last year when the results came out for individual councils? And I think it was happening sitting at the table there and open meeting what their score was. The heat on everybody has to say where your scores. Well, we were going to tell, and that caused a problem.
And that could happen. I mean, it only takes somebody to go and have a look at the updates at the end of the plan. I think from a CDEM group perspective, we need to be really clear that the scores don't tell a story. The scores, if they do get published, the scores actually pose more questions. They certainly don't give an answer. And the answer I'm giving you is some councils have gone in and assessed all of the every one of their SIMS functions, and their scores have reflected that, and they've been quite high. Some councils have only done a very small focused exercise that tested very limited numbers of their SIMS functions. But maybe they walked into it without their eyes understanding it fully, not thinking that they just wouldn't get scored at all, or the ones that they didn't test, but actually they got scored a 0 for the ones that they didn't.
That's the issue, Mr. Chair. Unless everyone's doing exactly the same, it's totally irrelevant.
Yeah, if you haven't got a standard, you haven't an assessment. You're assessing against.
I don't know. I think our council is doing reasonably well. I think they're the core for us. But for those who are challenged, are we looking to support each other across the chief executives need to talk to each other and get some cross-pollination? I don't know. I'm not in that area of the business. So yeah, how can we help each other?
Barry, do you know what score the regional council got out of it? No. Yeah.
So
perhaps you should.
that indicates just how relevant it is. You know, if it was of extreme relevance, it would have been broadcast. And so, yeah, this is just reflecting exactly what Junior's said. You know, take it as that reflection. But it's always difficult when you get a framework that's across a range of modules, and some have only done some modules. You know, if you go to university and you're saying, well, have you got the full degree, have you got did you just pass, or have you got all these other ones? It's always difficult to do a measure comparing, across a learning framework. It's actually better to say we're on this journey and we've achieved excellence in these first few, and we're progressing to the end. So it should be about where you are on the journey and how you progress and how well you've done those. Then it means much more than the measures that just take isolated things.
I totally agree with you, if I can, through. Yeah, like I remember the very first scoring that we got from the national body, and that's probably 10 years ago, or however long ago it was now. And Waikato district got 47% as we were on a lot. We're way above that now. But if there are other councils, and I'm going to throw my hat in the ring here and say that I think we should be working together. If there is gaps, how can we help each other? And maybe that should be coordinated through the group. If other councils are willing and open to being assisted to get to that level, isn't that the collegial approach? We want the region to be at its best capable response, and all of our councils to be able to put their foot forward and get into it if we have to. But I really hope we don't need to. But when the ground stuff hits the fan, we really need to be able to and call on each other. So is that something that we can look at, or ask the jury through his team to look at with Keith?
That's certainly the approach, Councillor Smith. Absolutely, and I think I've point back to there are areas of excellence. Some councils have got specific, they're doing something particularly well that we will promote across the group area, and absolutely, it's all about consistency. So everything that we do at GMA is about trying to bring some kind of consistency and interoperability where we can support each other, and not just support each other, but support other CDEM groups in a consistent way. And on that note, for example, we as a Waikato CDEM are probably one of a handful of the 16 who have provided quite strong support to Nelson Tasman because of the trained staff. I don't know if you count on one of three of us.
So, it's good to know, but every other council in this group could do that at some stage, if not already.
Just through the chair, Julian, you made the comment that this was the first time this had been done, and just to put it in context, it's created an appetite within our group at Harrison. I mean, they really enjoyed that process. I think we need to be aware that it's different from the NEMA assessment, their capabilities. This was in-house, and it really they got a hell of a lot out of it, even though some of the areas weren't scored very well, or they didn't score very well in certain areas, they did in some. So, but I think there's going to be a much better engagement next time round, and then it will probably evolve from there into a more regional competition, if you like, or that desire to get better.
And that's the feedback we've had across the group, is it really has engaged and enthused people. They really enjoyed it in terms of safe environment amongst the colleagues to go. And I come back to where we're at on this, and Councillor Craig's commentary. There was a reason that this year was about setting a benchmark, and that is the 2024-2025 is the only one that's been, or we've set as a minimum. 2024-2025 is the end state, if you want, that we're in an advancing position or above. So this year it was about just setting that. Where do we go from? And everybody's done that. Some people have got a longer journey than others to get to that advancing state, but we've all started the journey together this year. So it's something we should be really pleased with.
Absolutely.
Through the chair, just at this point, we come on and we actually had a very, very good
Staff related to it. It has a positivity for create an infrastructure. They can come together quickly and operate.
But the exercises ran over the weekend, 24 hours over 2 days. You wouldn't have many staff there.
Yeah. It doesn't work out.
Any other comments, questions on that item? That we received,
Yes.
move seconds on the phone.
Oh.
Done. Service level agreement, and we're talking about South Waikato. Single light.
That we lose, somebody's poaching all our people.
We'll take you 3 words.
I bet.
So I'll speak to this one. So I might ask Vicky to jump in if she needs to, but we don't ordinarily report on these things. There's 2 reasons why I'm doing it. I'll come to them. So one is this is the service level agreement with chief executive. Right? This is kind of natural. But this is to advise you as joint committee that there is a new service level agreement with South Waikato District Council. We have at the moment 3 other SLAs in place, which are Hampton City, Melbourne, and Hull. And as pointed out, one of the staff, emergency management member for South Waikato left, and the South Waikato chief executive or CEG member approached and said, would you give us a proposal for a service level agreement? And of course we've obliged, and that's been signed off. But just for context for everyone, is the service level agreement is not with the GMO because we're not an employing entity. Service level agreement is through the regional council chief executive, and they employ the staff on behalf of that council for emergency management services. We manage them through here. However, the reason I bring it to your attention is twofold. One, you're in charge of group plans, and this doesn't. This agreement, I want to assure you, doesn't require a review plan because shared services is already covered within that. But I think it's probably building on Councillor Smith's comment as well around the shared space and the shared resource and the consistency and interoperability. So when you take that increase from 3 councils to 4, along with the Western Waikato who have their own shared service, then it's probably going some way to delivering on Goal 68. And Goal 68 of our plan says that we are to review the CDEM delivery model to achieve greater coordination of work programs. So we've now got, in essence, 7 out of the 10 territorial authorities are in some kind of shared service agreement, which increases that consistency. One thing I do point out, however, and again, it'll be interesting to see what the finite detail of the bill brings down. But NEMA have signalled very strongly, and the minister has signalled very strongly that it is unlikely, very unlikely, that there will be any changes to the way that CDEM is delivered at a local level. It's going to be move towards regionalisation and nationalisation, and local delivery is the preferred option. So if people not concerned, but if people had any questions about that, the minister has signalled that very clearly. So 7 out of 10 CDEM groups are in some kind now of shared service, which will increase that consistency and coordination.
Just thinking that Waikato district was, and that was at the time we got that 47% national, and we, for some reason, we felt that it would reach its maturity. That may change in the future, so I still think we've got a relationship with Central. So, yeah.
So the 3 that are outside shared services is Waikato, Taupo, TC10.
But going back to Councillor Smith, for yourself, Mr. Chick, back to Councillor Smith's comment. there are very good relationships. Very good relationships throughout the CDEM area.
So we welcome something like that. If we employ someone to take up that role,
Doing it, recruiting.
I'm not applying for it.
To open up, give it a return next time and make that. No, it's stuck to you.
Okay, thank you for the information. The information we received, Tom's still there. So, second. Same. We've gone to page 30.
I'm speaking to this one, so it's just a brief update. I know the context of this is the emergency management awards at Waikato. The context of this was the previous ream or senior ream, Tsunami was leaving, and we looked at using, so as our administrative authority, we looked at using Waikato Regional Council processes to reward and acknowledge the longevity in the service. And what became clear was that actually there is no space for external awards that we're looking at. And when we looked across the region, every council has their own approach to awards. Some do community awards, some do external awards, some are their own. And so I came here and said, how do you want to acknowledge Suzanne Vowles? And you gave me some direction. But Councillor Lee asked the question, why couldn't we do our own? If we constrained, why couldn't we have our own civil defence awards? So we resolved to go away and have a look at that. It's a good idea. I would have loved to have been able to say that we've sorted this out for you before the end of this triennial, but we are looking at it. But there are some procedural, even though we are looking at our own civil defence awards, we come back to the fact our administrative authority is Waikato Regional Council. Any awards would fall under the policies of the Waikato Regional Council. We're having to, at the moment, we're just navigating issues around sensitive expenditure and what that looks like, and fringe benefit tax considerations. So we are developing what Councillor Lee asked us to do, but it hasn't been as straightforward as we thought it would be, because we can call it a civil defence award, but it still comes under the regional council's policies, and we need to ensure that it's legally exposed in relation to that. They'll be very, just for clarity purposes, the staff at the regional council are responsible for being very supportive and helping us to develop our own policy that is consistent, or our own approach is consistent with their rules. There's no obstacles or challenges there. It is just navigating sensitive expenditure stuff.
So it's dollar driven.
It's not so much dollar, but it is because we're spending public money.
There's, you can't buy flares for a member of staff that recording it and having a total at the end of the year, and it's over a certain value, you will pay for each benefits. So that's the world we live in. So it's.
I used to issue certificates of appreciation and those sort of things. And carried it along with the Regional Transport Committee. Presented.
Can't get money. Or something that's valued.
Because at least that was yours was $150.
It's things like if we wanted to, it's things like if we wanted to turn around and say we want to have an awards evening, or we wanted to give somebody a gift, we wanted to award Langley and say go and have dinner somewhere. If that event takes place outside of council premises, it attracts this. We went through it. It attracts fringe benefit tax because it's taken place, and it has implications, or tax implications potentially for the person who receives the gift. So what I thought would be a relatively straightforward process is not straightforward.
Does not the chair of the regional council have a Errol fund? No. We have to report if we receive any gift which amounts to $100.
Yeah, I think we're all on that boat.
But we've now brought another rule that if they accumulate to $100, so in other words, if you get 3 at $35, then it triggers it. So it's how much you're receiving. But yes, it's gone mad in terms of identifying public office expenditure. You've got to be seen to be spending nothing.
If you call it cohort, it's, yes, turn it around. But did we use petrol vehicles?
They get caught.
Fine, first.
You want, sorry, to get on, it's something amusing, just Google central government gift registers. And you look on there, and someone I saw once, they received a little foam things you put around your can of beer. They received one of those and they declared it. So that's the sort of level they get into.
That's the information we received. Update from.
Understood.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Do you want me to come out?
Yeah, please.
I also said.
It's not another thing, you're loaded my think of it.
Kia ora, and thank you for allowing me to attend. This is my first joint committee in person. I did attend your last one virtually, but I am your REMA responsible for the Waikato group, so thank you.
You the Susan Bells.
Say that again, sorry?
Are you the Suzanne Bells?
I certainly am. With training wheels on. So I have submitted the report in writing. I'm happy to go through that if there are any points for concern.
I'll just highlight some of the.
Most definitely, Mr. Chair. So the trifecta program, as Group Manager Julian has raised, written submissions to the Select Committee are likely to be called for in late November 22, with hearings early in 23. The review of the National Civil Defence and Emergency Management Plan and Guide is happening alongside the development of the bill to ensure that there is alignment. NEMA is aiming to engage with the sector partners on an early draft of the national plan from October to December 22. So that's a trifecta update. You've already discussed the Local Government Powers Act during the election process, so I won't reiterate that. Foot and mouth disease, Biosecurity New Zealand, as part of MPI, is the lead agency for biosecurity and holds responsibility to plan for and respond to the risks and impacts of foot and mouth disease. This planning and exercising is underway currently, and NEMA from the emergency management sector is participating in that. There is a MOU that's been signed, a memorandum of cooperation between the United States FEMA and NEMA to ensure that there is sharing of best practice and process between the two countries. United Nations Ocean Decade Tsunami Program. The manager of regional partnerships went to a UNESCO scientific committee in Paris and participated in that to ensure that there is international best practice and alignment in tsunami planning. And lastly, a Wānanga Hui is being conducted in September in Wellington to enable iwi and Māori engagement to design a more modern and collaborative process in emergency management systems. And that is being hosted by Honga Ke Marae. That is the end of my report, Mr. Chair.
So outside of your report, what's happening through your head office that's likely to impact on us?
So in general, NEMA has been focused over the last several weeks with supporting the response to the South Island weather events. This has had an impact nationally on staffing with surge support down there, which has been gratefully received and very welcomed both by West Coast, Nelson Tasman and Marlborough. There is currently an emergency management leadership development program being run, which has a staff member from Waikato group attending, which is fantastic in building national consistency, relationships and training. Other than that, that's high-level points.
Nothing we should be concerned about.
Nothing that hasn't already been raised, Mr. Chair.
Any questions? Questions. Thank you for your report. Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
So, you can say it. Yeah.
Steady.
Brussels seconded. Information be received. Mainly, you got a report on behalf of the gig that you thought you just tired from and what you back and say you're a man.
Yes, I think impressively, the secretary could note, we could please send out some invitations to Mr. Breen that appears on his calendar, and briefly he had other matters he had to put in today. It wasn't in his diary for whatever reason. So yeah, more than happy to take you through the report, which please take as read, and most of the matters that were raised in there covered off today. So there was some response teams, the exercise, tsunami zones, Māori participation, some defence. So if there was any questions on any of those items, happy to take them. But essentially, what we decided feeds into this. Okay.
So you've got a comment in there that the big members received the full reports of all members for their assessments. We have to be made available to
So all received those. I think we reported to our needs and management group.
Yes, no.
So they've all been, well, they should be reported to the answers. We'll go to test for reasons. Julian's had one. You'll need to.
questions of
No, I'm fine with this. I've got two small things after this.
meeting might be closed. Any questions of Keegan or Dorothy? And it moves the receipt of the three people. Seconds.
That's where Mr. Green's from.
Just help us.
So through the chair, Gareth was here at the last meeting,
Yeah.
as the new chair.
And I'm not sure how the invitation didn't get into his diary, but I'm sure most official staff that would put on my own. If you added it, and the fact that it didn't get there, defend. These two are good stuff. Okay, that concludes the meeting.
I'm not sure if it's been noted anywhere, but our senior controller, Bill Bellin, has resigned as controller. You did know that it's Will Dorfman, will be health main controller now.
So who will be?
Will Dorfman, he has been the understudy for many years. And just before you close the meeting, I'm not sure, but is anyone going to say thank you to this Triennial Period?
Yes, as deputy chair of the.
Oh, okay, I'll do that.
If we could just do it before the meetings. So I've just got a few points here. Hugh Burko, it's like your life. So in the results of the 2009 McDem monitoring evaluation, leadership was identified as a key area of development. At that time, Hugh was openly one of the stronger advocates for the need for change at the CEG Group, and unsurprisingly, he was nominated as the Joint Committee Chair in November 2010. Under Hugh's leadership of this group, we have moved from 15 out of 16 to 4. And one of the most specific legacies that he will leave with us is our regional funding model. The funding model is greatly admired in other CDEM groups and by those officials who are currently crafting new national policy settings. The fact that Hugh achieved consensus in adopting this regional funding model in New Zealand's most politically complex CDEM group is a reflection of his political manner. Hugh's leadership has been officially recognised by the Minister of CDEM at the 2021 NEMA Emergency Management Awards. He was highly commended for his outstanding leadership in governance emergency management. Can I just say, Hugh, before we make a small presentation to you, that I thank you for your guidance, your leadership, your friendship, and your institutional knowledge is going to be greatly missed. Not every chair, albeit regional councillor, can earn the respect of your colleagues and staff quite like you do. You should feel proud of the legacy you're leaving behind and look forward to the future and enjoy retired life. So we have a gift for you. It is called a Waikato. It is a traditional weapon of Māori chiefs and is also used by rangatira in speeches and ceremony to accentuate the delivery of a particular point. There is a small carving on the side of the weapon acting as a guardian to its owner. We present this to you, Hugh, a Waikato, in recognition of the leadership and guardianship that you have provided the Waikato Civil Defence and Emergency Group over the last 12 years.
How did you get that through? When you...
You're going to pay the fridge.
You get a lot of employees.
Before you have a lot of reply, I'm just on the care, I'd like to say a few words. Happy birthday for last Friday. So Hugh, your career is actually in local government's been quite impressive. So 27 years in local government, 15 as mayor, 9 as a regional councillor, and I really found that's really quite staggering. 3 years like community board, mistake. You sort of like after that. That became your favourite entity. I think you are the only inaugural member of the original joint committee. If my memory serves me right, it was formed in sort of Waikato leaned forward a bit back in the days when the Act was being changed, and it formed a sort of a shadow joint committee for the years as the Act was being developed. And then the legislation was taking so long to come that they disbanded it in 2005, formally formed this joint committee. You are the only survivor, shows your tenacity. As Councillor Barker said, you have joined, appointed the chair in November after the elections, 2010. So 12 years. It's quite a long lag leading this group of people. And of course, before that, you had 9 years as chair of the Thames Valley ELA, and that was another really civil defence organisation. And I guess, Hugh, I first ran into you, I think it was in the mid-90s, when I was in Milesville. Sort of, Hugh's ways. I remember one day we had some times, together shoveling some chicken shit. Well, as it was, I shoveled it, and Hugh stood there with a clipboard and supervised. I guess that's the major in you coming out. I'd like to thank Hugh with the Thames Valley EOA that we led. I think that we led the way, because some of the models they allow for in the new Act, these emergency operating areas, etc., the Thames Valley put in place a long time ago. So you've shown us leadership there. It'd be fair to say that the first 5 years of this group were challenging. As I said, we did lean forward and have a shadow group to start with. Those 5 years we tried to move and try to be better at our regionalisation, but really inadequate funding, lack of resources, and parochialism at the local level really meant that we struggled to put things in place. And we all know about the review in 2009, the capital assessment report, and I guess in 2010 we knew we had to do something different. To our credit, we've really moved forward, and under your leadership, Hugh, we've turned that ship around, and as Councillor Parker said, we featured really well. And one of the I guess the big things, and Councillor Parker mentioned, was that we addressed the elephant in the room, and it always was that funding. You were able to get good buy-in from all of our members. Herding 11 cats, it can be difficult at times. Allowed us to build up a really good GMO team, with the right people around the table with the right resources. We've got these purpose-built facilities, and we're really in a great place. And thank you for that. So you really did shift the dial. And I think what people don't sort of realise is the sacrifice that Hugh made. Hugh always wanted to be a mayor that served longer than Tim Sherlock. But with only 15 years under the belt, he decided that it was someone had to take one for the team, and he turned to the dark side and he came to the regional council so that he could have a far more influence on what was happening around the regional council table with civil defence. And all jokes aside, you've been a great advocate and a very staunch advocate. And I imagine the old banging the table and other things to make sure that we set up some really good, operating, funding, and decision making around the regional council table, because it's an interesting relationship, the way that the act's been set up. So Hugh, on behalf of Keith, thanks for your leadership. Enjoyed being your pseudo CEO in this sort of defence role, and I wish you all the best in your retirement.
Oh, thank you very much. When I look back, when I first became mayor in 1998, I got 100% into the combined development. Matamata Harrogate district, in a Thames Primary district, doing our own joint control of civil defence in that area. Ron White was the manager, and the most hated group in the whole of the area was this outfit called a group, where they would send some of their third-tier managers over there to tell Eastern Waikato how we should manage events. Not wanted, and they may have been the second most hated group there, and the one hated group, of course, was the Waikato Regional Council, who sent these people. Said, you will do as you're told, and we are the bosses. And, we've got a piece of subservience to us. It resulted in a lot of political manoeuvring, and we looked at the Act and we said, what does the Act say? That the Regional Council have to provide administrative support, which I think is still words in the Act. We said, what does that mean? And we determined that it meant they will take the minutes. That's your role under the Act. So you take nothing more, no advice, no nothing. And so the group was then one person, Ainsley, working from the room cupboard in Waikato Regional Council offices. And we said, fine, we're going to shift the group and we're going to take it away from the Regional Council of Waikato and we're going to Howell City Council. Their works depot, special building there, being set up there, because Tony Marriott was the chief executive of Howell City and Tony Marriott was the mate. And we all said, we support our mates regardless of the stupid decision for us to make. So we shifted it out of Regional Council into Howell City. That didn't work, never worked. So slowly we shifted it back. But it's pleasing for me, having done 24 years on this committee, that it used to be a committee that everybody would steer away from. I didn't want to come. We also had the ability that we had to have all members present to approve the budget. Basically, all members wouldn't turn up, so we couldn't approve the budget. And it was a shambles in most times. We believed that the Eastern Waikato collective was pretty efficient. We didn't have any faith at all. The group and I think the majority of the members didn't have faith because it didn't have any money, didn't have any staff, didn't have any support. It was just a pain in the bum. So we've come a long way. I've done PowerPoint presentations that I presented to my fellow mayors. So I said, fancy works, and this goes there. And they looked at them, and at the end, I said, any questions? They said, didn't understand the word you said, but you obviously understand what it is, so carry on. But we've come a long way, and I'm satisfied that I'm leaving the organisation with good financial control, good staff control, good outcome of where we're going. And this group has got a definite future, more than what we ever had. I thank you for your support, for the members that support me. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's around I have enjoyed my time here. And thank you for your support. Thank you very much. I'll declare the meeting closed.
Really, to see outside for yeah, I can believe being paid for by Council Trade and now the French benefit of the definitely to mark the evidence